I know that the location I'm in received 10 feet of storm surge, so it's incredible what a difference it is 5 years later.
Angie, thank you so much. And you know, it was 5 years ago that we were starting to realize that for folks living in the Keys, it was time to get out. And it was my first storm with you. And you went on the air and said, if you're still in the Keys, you need to get out now. And it ended up that forecast was correct.
No, indeed. And as a matter of fact, it was a great example of the collaboration between the National Weather Service and us in the media, because we are partners to be able to deliver that life-saving message from the National Weather Service. And there was a phone call that evening. I'll pull Ryan Phillips into this. He called Bill South down there in National Weather Service Key West, and they told him that they were about to issue a very urgent message, so I got on the air and gave that urgent message. And
what you're looking at right now is the path, and we've been talking about this all week. 7 landfalls over the course of 5 days. The first one, historic, Barbuda, then St. Martin, then just north of Puerto Rico. Little Inagua was yesterday, and then it ramps up and then makes that landfall in Cuba before the right turn. I mean, it got stronger in the 24 hours exactly 5 years ago.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting how it hugged the coast of Cuba, because that might have saved Metro Miami and Fort Lauderdale, where there was a risk, of course, of having a much, much worse situation than what we saw. But we still got sideswiped pretty good from that system. And
we're going to show some video of what happened far away from the eye because the storm was so big. Storm surge, John. I mean, up and down the East Coast, historic.
No, I mean, Angie just spoke of the 10 feet of storm surge where she was standing just now. Brickell, this is Brickell, right south of downtown Miami, and there were 5 feet of storm surge there, inundating the streets in and around that financial and now very much residential district of South Florida. It was scary. There was a lot of seawater out there, which impacted many, many coastal structures up and down the coast from the Florida Keys, as you said, up Florida and even to states beyond Florida.
Now, I remember that next day we were waiting for that high tide, and sure enough, as soon as the high tide hit, we still had the onshore flow, and it was just devastating. You're going to be back in about 30 minutes with a tropical update, because we do have some systems we're watching.
But first, I'm going to bring in my colleagues, John Morales, our NBC6 hurricane specialist, and meteorologist Steve MacLaughlin. Guys, this, of course, wreaked havoc on this area, but today much recovery has occurred and they are currently thriving, but there's still some things left to be done.
Yeah, Angie, it's pretty amazing. I know I was down there right after the storm, and just the devastation in the Keys was incredible. But, you know, John, I wanted to start with what we're looking at behind, because this was on the 7th of September, and this was the NHC, the National Hurricane Center track, and basically it was taking a mega storm right across the metro, and thank goodness this isn't the ultimate path that ended up.
No, I mean, so many folks will remember this, because when this came out at 5 p.m. on Thursday, the 7th of September, 3 days before it made landfall, 155-mile-per-hour hurricane slicing through the heart of South Florida's megalopolis from Miami to Fort Lauderdale. That was about as scary a scenario as you can possibly imagine. It unnerved me, when I'm not normally shaken by any of these things, but I know that Jackie and Jawan remember it very, very well, when I was on the air and saying that, you know, that I was very concerned, and that my level of concern was about through the roof, as you can possibly imagine, and they answered, and you guys recall this. You said, yeah, John, I don't think I've ever seen you this way, you said. And imagine had we had, Steve, a Cat 4, high-end Cat 4, 155-mile-per-hour hurricane with gusts to 185 slicing through South Florida.
By the way, what we're looking at right now is coverage from the tornadoes that were going on, because remember, even though the center of the storm was, 90 miles away from Miami, we were in that right front quadrant, the dreaded quadrant, where all of those tornadoes happened. I think there were 9 warnings in a matter of, a couple of hours?
Yeah, and they were coming in, those warnings, one after the other. Our radar was brand new at the time, and we were showing these circulations and telling you that warnings would be coming out soon, even before the warnings were coming out. So it was very useful to alert the public. But I mean, the impact between the tornado threat, the wind surge, the gust to 100 miles an hour, all while the hurricane was 100 miles away from here, was just very impressive.
Amazing.
Guys, we know that in the immediate days after hurricanes like this, we see the impacts, the immediate impacts, but sometimes those impacts are long lasting, just as we've seen with the Key Deer 5 years later.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, talking about the immediate aftermath, John, you and I were talking. I took a trip down to the Keys as soon as they opened the overseas highway because it was closed for so long.
Right.
There were miles and miles and miles on either side of Marathon and Isla Mirada, 3 stories high of debris, houses, furniture,
Horrible.
appliances. And then you get to Key West, and it wasn't as bad. I mean, it was manageable just 20 miles away from Cudjoe Key.
Well, I mean, it's interesting, right? I mean, just 20 miles to the west, but of course, they were on the not so active, somewhat weaker side of Irma. But Irma was so huge, its circulation was so broad that its impact from the lower Keys extended not through the rest of the Florida Keys only, but through the rest of Florida, into Georgia, into the Carolinas. And that's why we had 100-mile-an-hour wind gusts here in metro Miami and Broward County. Also, we had a 5-foot storm surge in downtown Miami with these horrific images from in and around Brickell, which we recall very well, and all the damage that the water did. We also had quite a bit of tornadic activity. We had rainfall. I mean, the impacts of Irma were very, very broad.
Yeah, and looking at this video, you know, we think about this as both a wind event closer to the center of the storm, but it was a water event, a storm surge event for so much of the East Coast, hundreds of miles away.
Hundreds of miles away. And in the Keys, you know, where Angie's standing right now, they had 10 feet of water. I mean, you know, storm surge is historically the biggest killer in hurricanes. That's why it's so important to evacuate people from the coast. That's why the message was so urgent to get people out of the Keys. I think, you know, we got that message across, and most people did take action.
And we'll see you in a couple minutes with a tropical update. For now, we'll send it back over to you, Juan.